Hello, everybody. Hello again. I'm Lucas Ferron. I'm the founder and director of the international research platform SIMM. Welcome to the fourth session now of the symposium. I'm at the Brussels Center for Fine Arts, BOZAR, together with Raffaele Monnoyer and Amber de Munk, who help us make this online symposium possible. Today's session is the first of two sessions during which we will focus on research which tries to come to a better understanding of intercultural music programs. John Sloboda will chair today's session. After the short presentations of the four research projects we selected for today, John will first have a panel discussion with the scholars involved in these projects, and following that panel discussion, I will be able to propose some of your questions to them. As you can read in the chat, your camera and audio have been muted and will continue to be muted throughout the session. If you have questions for the Q&A, please use the Q&A button down below your screen, not the chat button. Your questions will only be visible for the speakers and moderators, not for the other attendees. I will be back later on. But before giving him the floor, let me first introduce you shortly to John Sloboda. John is involved in many things at the same time, but what interests us here in particular is that he's research professor at the Guildhall School of Music and Drama, and from 2017 up to a few weeks ago, the founding president of the platform, the research platform SIMM. John is also leading an international comparative research on what motivates musicians to be involved in social and community music projects and what their needs are in terms of accompaniment and training. The research involves academics and their institutions in the UK, Finland, Colombia, and Belgium. John already presented this research project during the first session of the symposium on the 19th of January. John, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lucas, for that generous welcome, and thank you to colleagues at BOZAR for the wonderful support you're giving us all, and also welcome to my fellow speakers. Welcome to the first of two sessions on intercultural social music projects. Many SIMM projects bring together people or groups from different cultures. Where researchers are involved, the researcher can also be from a different culture than the participants. How do we best navigate the cultural and ethical sensitivities that may arise? And what lessons can we learn about managing such SIMM work to the mutual benefit of all involved? Today we have four quite different perspectives on this topic from four different countries, some working within country, some internationally, and I'll briefly introduce each before their presentation. We begin with Kim Buskov, postdoctoral scholar at Aarhus University, Copenhagen, Denmark. His doctorate, gained in 2019, was on intercultural music activities, and his presentation today is entitled Exploring Ethical Dilemmas in Intercultural Music Making and Research in a Palestinian Refugee Camp in Lebanon.
I'm sorry, John. John.
Hello.
I'm sorry, it's Lucas. I have to intervene. You forgot to put on your camera, so we didn't see you.
Oh, okay, but you heard me.
Yes, we did hear you, yes.
Fine, thanks a lot. So over to you, Kim.
Thank you, John. Hello all, I'm Kim Buskov, speaking to you from Copenhagen, Denmark. I wish to share some reflections about the ethical dilemmas that might arise in intercultural musical social work. When music is put to work as a social tool, it is often based on ideas of music as a resource for addressing issues related to mental health, cultural rights, marginalization, conflict resolution, or broader social change. In recent years, we have witnessed an increasing interest in using music as a social tool all over the world, also in the global south, where such interventions sometimes involve people from the global north traveling to locations in the south in order to facilitate music making in cooperation with local partners. As academic attention is beginning to be directed towards the social impact of music and the arts, we have also noted how researchers are beginning to be a part of this mix, how researchers, often representing academic institutions in the North, place themselves in connection to musical social work in the South in order to explore different topics. While such collaborations may be hugely valuable for all partners involved, I believe there's good reason to consider some of the ethical dilemmas that may arise due to the varying objectives, interests, and obligations of the organizations involved. To illustrate this, I wish to briefly present the context that I've been working in for quite some years now, which is a community music program in a Palestinian refugee camp in Lebanon, which provides music and dance activities 2 times a week for between 40 and 60 children and young people from the refugee camp. The program is a result of a long-standing collaboration between Norwegian organizations and a local Palestinian NGO. The Norwegian partners have provided musical instruments, teacher training, salaries for the local teachers, and for many years the program also served as a site of practicum for student music teachers from the Norwegian Academy of Music that came to Lebanon every year to do music workshops with the Palestinian children. This collaboration is intended to be a mutual partnership. Not only Norwegians travel to Lebanon, but also groups of Palestinians have traveled to Norway as part of a cultural exchange program to perform Palestinian music and dance for and with Norwegian children and youth. I've been lucky enough to be involved in this program both as a volunteer music teacher in Lebanon for an extended period of time and subsequently as a PhD researcher at the Norwegian Academy of Music, with the task of exploring the significance of the music activities for the Palestinian participants. But in this research process, I found myself struggling with some dilemmas due to the different interests and obligations of the local NGO and myself as a researcher. When thinking of the interests of the local NGO collaborating with partners from the North, and particularly with me as a researcher, I can think of at least 3 interests. First, the NGO would like to have the effectiveness or value of the activities documented in order to be able to sustain funding and attract more resources for the program. Research into the impact of music making is a way of bringing legitimacy to the activities. Second, partnerships with organizations and researchers in the global North is important because the Palestinian community in Lebanon is without political representation. In order for this group of people to be heard and to have their problems and needs addressed, they are dependent on their ability to become visible to the international community, which my research might help to. Third, by being able to sustain such international relations, the NGO is able to secure its own position in the Palestinian community as an important and powerful organization, having a say in the matters concerning the Palestinian community in Lebanon. And actually, the music activities play a central role in this effort because staging performances of Palestinian music and dance is a way of performing a Palestinian national identity. And by providing cultural and national education for the children growing up in the camp, this NGO is securing its place as an important organization in the Palestinian community by using music to assert the unity of the Palestinian community across generations and thereby contributing to the political effort of attaining the right of return to Palestine. Obviously, I'm happy to be able to contribute to highlighting the struggle of the forgotten Palestinians in Lebanon and point to the great work being done in this particular program. Yet as a researcher, I'm not merely interested in proving the program's effectiveness or representing the struggle of the Palestinians, but also to explore issues relevant to the scientific community I'm a part of. This also involved exploring the more ambiguous functions of music making in this context and how music may not only lead to positive social transformation, but also to the reproduction of specific social ideas and values that may constrain the lives of the young Palestinians in certain ways. What I found in my research was that while music on one hand may be seen as a great resource for self-expression, for a sense of belonging and experiences of commonality, musical performance in this context It's also a form of national education in which specific forms of Palestinian nationalism and legitimate feelings regarding what it means to be a Palestinian are imposed. By highlighting some voices of dissent among my research participants, in my research I put forward a more conflictual picture of what musical participation means in this context, a picture that breaks with or complicate the official or dominant narrative of the significance of music making as an expression of Palestinian unity that more commonly are put forward by the Palestinian NGO. When doing research on a marginalized community like the Palestinians in Lebanon, one should be extremely attentive towards unequal power relations between researcher and the researched, and cautious of issues of representation in order not to harm the organizations and participants involved. Yet one should not be blind to the power relations and different experiences at play in the local context and how music making may be entangled in such relations. Writing about such issues is fraught with ethical dilemmas. There's a lot of things to be examined in this particular case, but what I wish to leave you with is the thought that doing research, critical research that goes deeply into controversial, conflictual stuff of such programs is very important in order to deepen our understanding of what we do. But this is an endeavor likely to become entangled in conflicts of interests. And this is a sensitive area, especially when such research is conducted in intercultural settings. For research into the social impact of music making, I think it's absolutely necessary to reflect more upon such issues in order to be able to both protect the people and programs we study, as well as the academic integrity of our research. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed, Kim, and your timing was completely perfect. So we're going to move straight on to our second presenter, Frank Husser, who is Head of Music Education in the Herb Alpert School of Music at the University of California, Los Angeles. He's presenting on behalf of his two co-authors, Kelsey Smith of the Young Musicians Foundation and Emily Kubitsky of the Global Arts Corporation, representing the two Los Angeles-based intercultural projects he will be talking about. Kelsey and Emily will join us for the panel discussion. Frank's presentation is entitled Creating and Reconceptualizing Values and Purpose in Music Education. Frank, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you and good morning from Los Angeles. Let me get this set up. There we go. There we go. Okay. In my work in the area of music teacher preparation, I have become increasingly frustrated with the training we are required to provide future music educators, which tends to disregard the multicultural population seen in most schools, as well as the diverse musical practices that make up artistic life in California. Fortunately, innovative music teaching is emerging in nonprofit organizations that work with young people outside of formal school settings. Learners in these programs often attend schools that do not offer music instruction or where the curriculum offered does not match their musical interests and needs. This presentation focuses on two Los Angeles-based organizations, the long-standing Young Musicians Foundation and the newly formed Global Arts. YMF has evolved from an organization focused on training future elite orchestra musicians into one that now works with diverse and underserved youth in Los Angeles. Global Arts was created by individuals seeking ways to provide a level of instructional depth that goes beyond what is typically offered in most organizations. Okay. YMF was created in 1955 to provide elite training for future orchestra musicians. The Young Musicians Foundation has become increasingly aware that future musicians must move beyond just performance and engage in artistic citizenship. This change in focus is a direct result of the necessity to find ways of serving a society undergoing profound social and political shifts. First and foremost, the primary mission of the Young Musicians Foundation is now to serve young people that have been denied access to equitable arts education. YMF serves students who come from across more than 150 square miles throughout the Los Angeles area. About 80% of these students identify as Hispanic and Latinx, and 15% as Black or African Americans. All of the schools and partners YMF work with would qualify for federal funding from the U.S. Department of Education based on their family's income. In previous years, YMF maintained an elite training orchestra, and a number of members of this orchestra worked directly within the outreach programs. As the mission shifted towards working with underserved populations, the organization has discontinued the orchestra, and instead YMF now offers a wide range of musical programs in the community. These include an early childhood and elementary music education program, instrumental and vocal classes, music technology opportunities that develop songwriting and production skills, and a variety of workshops and concerts that are free and open to the community. As YMF refocused resources towards supporting marginalized communities and drastically increased the number of young people served, the profile of the teaching artists working in the program shifted radically. The organization recognizes that relevant teaching experience and value alignment are critical. The majority of the teaching artists indicate that the current mission of YMF is critical in the decision to work with the organization. This translates into passionate educators who are deeply aligned with the YMF mission. The result has been powerful for the organization. YMF has redesigned their work to support inclusion of social emotional learning for students in all programming. This decision is informed by the radical isolation of students that face this year, and is a shift that will remain in place. The organization emphasizes work that supports the whole child through the arts, as opposed to work that focuses on purely musical skill acquisition. Although that work is of course important, but a child is lonely, hungry, and facing any type of adversity, they need to be seen and heard, and the music learning processes offered provides natural space for that to happen. Global Arts' mission is to contribute to educational equity by providing exceptional music classes for underserved youth and continuing professional development for educators. In particular, the organization focuses on serving people residing in the Salvadoran corridor in the Pico Union neighborhood of Los Angeles, which has the largest number of Salvadorans outside of El Salvador. The desire to provide music programs to this community is twofold. First, Salvadorans come from a rich musical background where knowing how to play an instrument and be in a band is highly valued. However, many Pico Union community members and parents do not have access to formal music education and are very interested in providing instruction for their children. By adding a supplemental music program to their community, Global Arts is not replacing the music taught within families, but instead adding formal music training to their skills. Secondly, many students in this community do not have a lot of support following graduation from high school. Most are first-generation American and do not have the tools at home to help navigate applying to music schools and college. In this regard, the system fails them. Global Arts allows students to stay in the program until they are 21 years old, and they continue to receive music lessons as well as support on navigating the college process. The founders of Global Arts chose to create a new nonprofit, even though there is an abundance of other music and music education nonprofit organizations offering similar services. After working in the nonprofit music education sphere for 12 years, the founders grew increasingly aware that the top priority of most organizations is the musical product of the student. While this can sometimes be an indicator of progress, it does not focus on the child's individual needs throughout the learning process, nor does it focus on how the child got there, their relationship with an educator. Global Arts takes a step away from this common mode of judging musical success and puts an equal lens on the process of the student and the process of the educator. By creating a small, community-based program, we are able to grow and develop equally to meet the needs of students and teachers, which is why the Professional Development Series is so important. This is a bi-weekly series that runs throughout the academic year. Workshops are accessible online to teachers across the globe. This year, the workshop theme is social inequality and cultural relevant teaching. These programs demonstrate that organizations and individuals sponsoring them evolve over time to meet the changing needs of communities. The changes in YMF reflect a move in the philanthropic community towards supporting marginalized communities and is an indicator of how interests of nonprofits can serve as catalysts for organizational and community change. The impetus for founding Global Arts was the recognition of the need to provide learners in all communities with quality music instruction that also nourishes the whole child. Programs provided by the nonprofit organizations are not constrained by the traditions of school music and offer models for reconceptualizing both why and how we teach music. Nonprofits have the freedom to create music programs that interest learners, employ teachers that can engage students, and encourage pedagogical approaches that evolve rather than remain static. These organizations are an example of how music learning programs might be reconceptualized to promote excellent music instruction and meet the interests of young people and provide environments that nurture social emotional growth in participants. Again, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Frank, for a fascinating and also exceptionally timely presentation. We are bang on time. And so without further ado, I'm going to move to our third presenter, who is Journe, who is a doctoral researcher in the musicology department at Humboldt University in Berlin. And his presentation is entitled, No Music in Times of COVID-19, Challenges and Changes in Music Work with Refugees in Berlin. Journe, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Okay, now you should be seeing my presentation. Yeah, thank you for that wonderful introduction, Journe, and a big thanks to the organizing team for letting this symposium come to life again, despite the pandemic. And talking about the pandemic, welcome to my little presentation, No Music in Times of COVID-19, Challenges and Chances in Music Work with Refugees in Berlin. When I handed in my abstract last year, I did not know how the pandemic was going to turn out, but I thought the symposium would be the perfect place to talk about an ongoing music project. So here's my structure. First, I will talk about the goals of my presentation. Then I will give you some information on my research methods and on the background of last year's work and the pandemic in Berlin. Then I will talk about some findings before we'll try a short conclusion. So my goals. First, record experiences with the pandemic to share these experiences with other researchers and practitioners. Second, evaluate the influence of the pandemic on music projects with refugees. And third, develop strategies for recent and future improvement of music projects in crisis situations. My methods. My methods are firstly participant observation in the field of music work with refugees in the last year. I also conducted interviews with refugees and spoke with music teachers, organizers, and professionals in the field of refugee work in Berlin. I started establishing a first refugee music project in a German Red Cross refugee accommodation in Berlin 4 years ago. You can see that one on the pictures there. Ever since then, I have been organizing music projects with refugees, being a team of 3 at the moment, 2 refugee musicians and me. We teach children and young adults several instruments. While I work as a volunteer, the other teachers are being paid through charity funding. We work 2 days a week. One day we teach instruments in one-on-one sessions or in small groups. The other day we have small ensemble meetings where the instrumental abilities can be applied in a group context. Instruments used are several percussion instruments, guitar, piano, recorders, and singing. We play 1 small concert in the accommodation each summer and 1 in winter. Some background on the pandemic in Berlin. Whereas Germany handled the spread of the virus quite well during the first wave in March and April 2020, music venues and social music activities experienced very harsh restrictions. From the 8th of March on, bigger events and social gatherings had to be cancelled. The first national lockdown started at the 23rd of March and lasted until the 3rd of May. During the summer, small open-air concerts were allowed and seated music venues were allowed to open again. On 8th of October, there were more than 500 new infected people in Berlin on one day, which meant the whole city got classified as Corona risk area. Following rising numbers in Germany, a second so-called lockdown light started on 1st of November. Since infection rates did not go down, this lockdown light became a regular lockdown that has been lasting until now. My findings. What happened to the music projects as soon as the pandemic started? With the beginning of the first lockdown in March, we were not allowed to enter the accommodation anymore, so that there was a sudden disruption of the project. It was very uncertain if and when we would be allowed to continue our work in the accommodation. During the end of the lockdown and after some telephone sessions, we found ways to return to the accommodation. Distance musicking, performing outside, smaller groups, shifted timetables required maximum flexibility from every person involved, including the children and our funding organization that extended the funding period for 2 more months. Additionally, in autumn, we were able to cooperate with Berlin-based record label Hardcore Records, which was supposed to do a recording project with orphans in Brazil. That was obviously impossible, so they learned and recorded a song with the children in our accommodation. Influences. The influences of the pandemic on our project were and still are huge. They range from financial aspects over infrastructural challenges to the cancellation of projects or project parts. Strategies. Based on the experiences of the last year and an analysis of the sections of our music work that were affected by the pandemic, we try to figure out some strategies. At the moment, we are in the process of optimizing and expanding the current project while also conceptualizing new projects for more accommodations. Thus, some key strategies for this year's work will be more flexibility when it comes to funding, meaning both what funding money is spent for and when it has to be spent. Secondly, the usage of new locations that provide enough space for music making or outside music making. We will additionally insist on an increased awareness of music as education and all the other social benefits music provides, which are the reasons why we are all here today. We will also encourage more cooperation between music projects, funding organizations, the refugees we work with, and the accommodation facilitators like the German Red Cross. Last but not least, we have all become more aware of the benefits of digital media over the past few months when it comes to communication. The use of media for communication, but also for building teacher-pupil relationships and practice will be more important than in the past. I have to add that many refugees are very experienced when it comes to communicating on digital devices with other people. A short conclusion, the COVID-19 pandemic has challenged our music work in refugee accommodations in the past few months. However, we also recognize some new chances of cooperation and improvement that will last further than the pandemic. The development of strategies in dealing with the new circumstances will shape this year's work. I look forward to the next symposium to tell you all about this year's progress. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Journe. Another fascinating and also very well-timed presentation. So we're doing very well on schedule. Our final presenter is Alexandra Lamont, who is Professor in Music Psychology at Keele University in the UK. The paper is co-authored with Dr. Fiorella Montero Diaz, lecturer in ethnomusicology, also at Keele University. Alex researches on issues of musical development and musical engagement across the life course. And in the study she presents today, it is not people who make the intercultural journey, but musical instruments. Her presentation is entitled Instrumental Journeys, How Donating Musical Instruments Impacts on Identity and Well-Being. The floor is yours. Alex, we're not hearing you.
Okay. Right, is that better?
Perfect.
Can you hear me now?
Perfect, thank you.
Lovely, thank you very much. Yes, so I'm very pleased to be here to present some of the results of this project, which has been a little while in the conception. It was inspired partly by the work of Music Fund, which many of you will be familiar with, and also partly by a conversation with Georgia Nicolaou at the SIMM that took place in Porto. So we're going back nearly 3 years now, which prompted the idea of actually looking at what happens when people donate their musical instruments and how it affects both the person who is donating and eventually the recipient. Now today I'm just going to talk about the first part of that because that's where we are in this research project. It's unfortunately been quite affected by COVID, but prior to the pandemic we were able to make a start on this. So myself and my colleague Fiorella, who unfortunately is teaching today and can't be with us, have been beginning to explore this effect of donating musical instruments and the impact on individuals. So in terms of background, we know that access to music is extremely important to help people achieve their musical potential, and there are many social and cultural benefits, but not everybody has that access. Looking at the theoretical frameworks that we could apply to this kind of work, there's the notion of altruism, which can be pure and entirely selfless, or impure in the sense that we know we're going to feel good when we do something. We've got the concept of philanthropy, which I think is a theme that runs through some of the different projects that we've heard about today. We've also got a notion of what it means as a political identity to engage in this kind of activity. So if we want to donate something, we have this idea of what does it tell us about ourselves and how do we place ourselves within a wider political arena. Pro-social behaviour is extremely important. One's cultural background is also something to take into account. And then the more individual factors that we're interested in about subjective well-being and life satisfaction. So in this piece of research, what we're aiming to do is, first of all, to talk to people at the beginning of this journey. So the project is called Instrumental Journeys. The idea is these connections between people that can come through a physical artifact, in this case, a musical instrument. So we have been talking to people who have been thinking about donating or were donating or had donated an instrument to a charitable scheme. So the interviews took place at the point of donation, or perhaps for some of them a little while afterwards, when people had had a chance to reflect on what was going on. These are volunteer participants. They come from a large age range. Demographically, however, these are people who are relatively privileged, where the idea of giving something up is not a massive hardship. We haven't gathered a lot of background information about our volunteers because we want to find out more about the personal factors, but this will be something that could be important as we go on. So this is an ongoing project. Today I am going to tell you about, because we only have a short time, I'm going to tell you about a short amount of the data that we've looked at. So we asked people questions about where their musical instrument had come from, why they were motivated to donate, and what they thought was going to happen to the instruments afterwards, which is where we get into the intercultural aspect. So to summarise the results in a very brief format, some of the themes that are emerging from the interviews show there are a range of motivations, and some of them are actually curiously practical. People want to clear space. People don't know how to repair an instrument or how to look after it. The instrument is no longer suitable. For example, we might have bought a small instrument, such as a small size violin or cello, for a child that's now too big, and so the instrument is pointless at this stage. So there was a surprising number of these. We'd imagined that we were going to have a lot of very emotional narratives, and we did get those, but we also got a lot of practicalities. Guitarists with too many guitars just needing to clear a bit of room. However, what happens with these donations to schemes such as music funds, where the instrument goes to someone who's going to use it, to a music project, to some kind of educational project, these projects happen both locally and internationally. The point is actually that people feel that they want their instruments to be used. So there seems to be a moral imperative that a musical instrument is a valuable thing and it must be used in some way or another. So even if it's just a practical reason, people say, I don't want it sitting in my loft, making dust and not being used. But for some, donation is a lot more than that, and it's a way perhaps of creating or sustaining some kind of legacy. So you pass something on, and something of yourself will be able to transcend a kind of cultural gap, if you like, and to reach people who are a far way away from you, but also to live on. So there's a sense of a legacy. Often reflecting changes in people's musical identities. So people change their musical direction, they might change their instrument that they're interested in. They might have decided to give up on music. Music might be something that they're no longer going to be doing actively, and so they're re-evaluating their musical self, and passing on their instrument is a way of coming to terms with that. There are a lot of different emotions that are evoked, and in many of our interviews, people became quite distressed thinking about the past of the instruments and the legacy that they were passing on. But ultimately, there's a clear sense of relief because these people have decided it's time to let go. They're going through that process and they feel relieved at the end of it. And finally, which sort of demonstrates the socio-demographics of the people who are doing this, there's a sense of replaceability. Quite a few people said, well, if I wanted another one, I'll go and get one. So it's a sense that the musical instrument is not unique and somehow embodied and intertwined with oneself, but it's something that you can replace at a later date. If we want another one, if we need another violin, we'll go and buy one. So that's tied up with this notion of donation. I'm just going to give you one quote because time is short, but it shows this kind of process going through. It was someone who was donating a flute, and she says, the reason I kept it is it was really important to my grandparents and they paid for it. So we get a family connection there. It has sentimental value. I've not really had the heart to pass it on. And this is a common theme, that people just don't know what to do with instruments. And then when they discover some of these schemes that are around, they think, fantastic, now I know what to do with it. I didn't want it to just go to anybody. I wanted it to go to a good home where someone would appreciate it. The whole point of decluttering is to pass it on to someone who would value it. So this moral imperative. I feel like I can make my peace with handing it on in that way. So there's a lot going on in this short quote that illustrates a lot of the findings that we pulled out. So just to conclude on the future aspect of this, looking at the imagined journey that these instruments are going on, most people want to pass things on to people they know. If they don't have someone they know who can make use of it, again, that moral imperative, then they're looking for a good cause. But charity shops are not the right place for instruments. People seem to have a sense that that isn't necessarily going to guarantee a good cause. So there's this inequality that seems to be part of the motivation to donate, both at home and internationally. So one of the donors said, I think it was for the third world. She's aware that she's donated to a charitable scheme. She doesn't remember the details. It was a little while ago. But she says, I would have done it if it was for poorer inner city kids as well. So it's about people without and being able to donate to people without. And there's also a sense of needing to know and trust where the things are going to. So Wendy talked about not wanting them to go to someone who's going to start chucking them around and then sell them for money. So there's this moral imperative again, that the instruments have to be well used, and therefore a trust is absolutely essential. So just to round up then, direct transfer of a musical instrument is a very special kind of charitable act. There's a moral imperative to act responsibly, to recycle, to pass on these opportunities. It's not a spur of the moment decision, and as such, there's a lot of emotions tied up with it, and it has the potential to benefit the donors in relation to their own sense of identity and well-being. It raises lots of questions about privilege and inequality. It seems important for people to know how their donations will be used, and these personal connections seem to be really important in making people feel a little bit less guilty about having donated their instruments, as well as making them feel better. So I'm going to round that up there with thanks to everyone who's contributed to this research, including the Keele Institute for Social Inclusion, who I want to mention specifically for having funded us to engage in the start of this project. The intention is that we're going to, when the pandemic lets us, carry on looking at how these instruments are used, so the other side of the picture, but this is a little bit of an insight into where we are so far.
Thank you very much, Alex, and indeed thanks to all the four presenters for opening these fascinating but different windows into our topic. Can I invite all the panelists to switch their cameras and microphones on now? Thank you very much. And I'd like to begin the panel discussion by asking Frank to introduce his co-authors. So over to you, Frank.
Hey, thank you. I want to introduce Kelsey Smith from the Young Musicians Foundation. She's an experienced music educator who is now working in a nonprofit, and Emily Kubitsky, who is also a very experienced music educator who is working with nonprofits. Do either of you have anything you would like to add to what we've said?
Good morning. Thank you. Morning in Los Angeles, at least.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having us. Nothing else to add at this time. Just thank you to all the panelists for your fascinating work. And thank you, Frank, also for including our...
Emily.
Yes, thank you as well. It's really nice to be here. Thank you all for having us. And nothing else to add right now. Looking forward to our discussion. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
I have a question for both of you, actually, which is, do the tutors and facilitators on your schemes, are they drawn from and represent the constituencies that you work with, for example, Hispanic or El Salvadorian?
It's a great question. Emily, did you want to go first?
No, go ahead, Kelsey.
Sure. So this has definitely been an initiative of ours. Is, you know, in Los Angeles, there's so much diversity. In the classical music world, there tends to not be, which is why the dichotomy of kind of our organization, you know, being founded as a very classical institution and then going through this process of kind of refining our mission to really serve those who have the least access to music education opportunities in Los Angeles definitely meant we needed to kind of reframe how we looked at hiring processes. So in terms of our teaching artists, we have a very diverse group of teachers, and it's an ongoing initiative. And I think diversity, especially in the music landscape and especially in education in Los Angeles in particular, where our students are so diverse, is just so critical. So thank you for asking that question.
Thanks very much, Kelsey. It reminds me of Jeff Baker's keynote speech of a few weeks back, where he funding projects. Gradually, former students on the projects return to those projects as teachers and facilitators, and I wonder if you've observed that happening in your own projects.
Yeah, and I can speak on that as well, John. That's a fantastic question. When we started our organization 2 years ago, my first goal was to have someone on the executive team who represented the community. So our community engagement manager is Salvadorian, but born and raised in LA, like many of these young students. And then from there, the first thing we wanted to do was build a team of students who actually had a voice in the decision making. So we have a small group of interns and students who do a lot of the decision making and help the executive team on what the plans are for the organization moving forward.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and I would just like to add one little thing. We're having a real difficult time diversifying the candidate of music education teachers in this country. And that's a good deal part that studio teachers only want to work with top people, and getting remains difficult in spite of a university push towards diversity. So this is a really important question.
Thank you, Frank. I've noticed that in each of these studies, there are power relationships to be negotiated. In different ways, each project brings resources from outside to bear on the activity itself, so creating a potentially unequal donor-recipient relationship. These resources can be of various kinds: money, expertise, or social capital of one kind or another. Would any of you like to comment on how this inequality can best be negotiated, particularly so as to maintain dignity and empowerment in the recipient community and a relationship of equality and reciprocity?
Thoughts?
Kim, do you have something to say on that?
Say something about that. I believe the first step is to acknowledge that there actually is these unequal power relationships and that they're not dissolved in music making as I think many romantic notions of intercultural music making would maybe suggest, but acknowledging that music making may prove to be an arena where such power relations can be addressed or rearranged to a certain extent. And I think it is extremely important to acknowledge the resources that the recipients themselves bring into the mix, whether that would be music or hospitality or time or energy or personal experiences, and then try to facilitate some encounters in which the recipients appear as the resourceful and the donors appear as the dependent ones or the learners. So to find that relationship, at least temporarily, for different experiences to emerge, I think that would be a great way to start.
Fascinating. And in fact, one of the things I wanted to pick up in your presentation was that you talked about some participants expressing dissent. Well, dissent can be a way of, as it were, equalizing and empowering for the donors or the powerful to hear things that perhaps they don't particularly want to hear but need to hear. Could you give some examples of the specific types of dissent you experienced in this project?
Yeah, that would be young people from the program, or people not necessarily in the program, but the young people from the camp, talking about the role of the NGOs as national educators, or as organizations that try to uphold certain images of what it means to be a Palestinian, that are not necessarily 100% reflecting what the young generation growing up in the camps, what they are experiencing. So it's also about how the older generation wants to hold on to specific narratives, and a young generation that feel that their experiences are not necessarily reflected fully in that narrative. So for some of the people in the music program, the young people in the music program, they were not able to actually talk about this stuff openly, because they also had a responsibility to the organization they were involved with. So this is some of these things, they appeared in other types of conversations, and the dominant narrative about what this music program was about was generally repeated in the interviews, the research interviews. So this is kind of some findings that emerged through ethnographic work and through talking to all kind of people around the program and understanding what the NGOs are doing.
Thanks. Does anyone else want to comment on this topic before we move to another?
Okay. I could say some words about it because I'm working with refugees in Berlin, and for me it's always been important not to do music projects for refugees but with refugees. So from the beginning I always work with refugee teachers, because they can also be role models, and I cannot be a role model for a refugee. I'm not a refugee myself, but when there's a refugee teacher and they teach the children how to play an instrument, the children can see, okay, I might be a refugee, but I can also be a professional musician. I can also be someone who's got a job in Berlin.
Thank you very much.
I think that's an important part.
Yes, indeed. Before we go to the next topic, just to remind everybody that if you have questions, emerging questions, please do write them in the Q&A window at the bottom right of your screen. And Lucas is already busy, as it were, assessing what's coming in. Alex, your research focuses on the donor end of the relationship, and I was wondering to what extent the specific cultural destination instruments is of interest to your participants, you know, Morocco or Democratic Republic of Congo, and also whether you had any indication at all of how interested the people in the recipient musical projects might be in the specifics of where a particular instrument came from.
Yeah, thanks, John. I could have said a bit more about the schemes that people were donating to at the beginning of my talk, which might, for those who aren't familiar with them, might be useful just to give a bit of context to the answer. So the schemes that people were donating to, which is how we found them, were things like Music Fund's organisation, where there are links with partner groups, schemes and projects around the world that are set up to receive the instruments and make use of them. So there is that sort of notion that this is going to benefit somebody. And I was just, as you were asking that last question, reflecting on the quote from Wendy, who had donated a lot of brass instruments to various different sources, including her own family, but also to one of these schemes. And she says, you know, it doesn't matter if it was the third world, she thought. I mean, that's a very outdated expression these days, but she's a lady in her 70s, and so she's using language that she's familiar with. But she says, or it could have been for the inner city kids, it wouldn't have mattered. So in that respect, I think that's common to a lot of the donors, is that they're thinking they would like these things to go to a good home. And I think charity has changed a lot over the last 20, 30 years, in the sense that there's now a recognition that it's up to the organisation to choose how to do good with what's provided. So you can buy a goat for Christmas for somebody, but actually the charity would rather that you just said, here's the money, we're going to pretend we bought a goat, but can we use it on what we'd like to? And so this is kind of the way that this seems to be going with the musical instruments as well, is sort of, you know, let's put them to good use, whatever that happens to be. But I was just reflecting on that inequality is absolutely fundamental for these schemes to flourish. I don't think the moral imperative on its own would be enough for somebody to say, I'm not using my violin, I'm going to give it to my next door neighbour. That doesn't seem to be part of I mean, that might well happen, but I suppose then we wouldn't know about it. But it feels like these are much more meaningful donations that have that sense of wanting to do good somewhere. So in a sense, if there wasn't the inequality, then the instruments wouldn't be being passed on. So it's sort of fundamental. In response to your second question, we don't know yet because we haven't got that far with the research. I mean, Lucas might be able to talk about it in relation to Music Fund because he has direct contacts with all of the organisations who are the recipients. And there are other participants on the call who might join in from similar experiences, such as Georgia, who's working in a more local context. I would imagine, though, if I might speculate, that again there is this imagined donor, and it might be something that the people who are receiving these instruments might be thinking, well, this has come from somebody with, you know, lots of money and maybe too many, you know, not enough children, and these sorts of kind of, this is the too much, and you've got too much and you need to pass it on. And I don't know really how concrete these links are. So it seems like there's an imagined link from the donor that says there are people out there, they might be inner city children, they might be people in the global south who need our help, and I'm going to give to them. And then again, there might be that opposite perception of, here are people with lots of resources from the global north who are able to make those contributions, and we're happy to have them. But I can't answer that question just yet. That'll be one for a few years down the line.
Thanks very much, Alex. Moving on, members of a culturally defined group certainly have common characteristics and needs, but there are also likely to be strong individual differences in capacities and needs. And I wonder what lessons can be learned from SIMM projects like these about how to balance the attention to commonalities, which members of a group share, but keeping sensitivity to individual differences. I'm thinking, for example, of the group of refugees, such as you've worked with, Journe, who, while in one way share an identity, in other ways can be very disparate in nationality, experience, and ability.
Yeah, that is a very good point that you're talking about, John. Thank you for that question. It's definitely one of the harder things, and I don't think there's like 100% solution to that, because where the people come from, what ethnicities they identify with, or in what kind of religion they believe, that's very diverse in Berlin. Like, I'm working with people like with Sinti and Roma from Romania, and with refugees from Iraq, Palestine, Afghanistan, Syria, Eritrea. And one of the good things when you do a music project with children is that you in a way can blend out where they come from. We decide, and that's also what their parents wish, we use German as a teaching language, no matter what kind of language they usually speak. And that also depends on how long they have been in Germany. Some are more or less fluent in German, some hardly understand the word. And with music, we can, in a way, cross these bridges. And yeah, but it's not always easy. Like sometimes you have problems with understanding what the other one is saying. And from my experience, music is a good thing to work with people from different nationalities, and it helps a lot, but not always. So not a perfect solution from my side. Sorry about that.
Thank you. And Frank and colleagues, I heard, I think, that both these projects pay a lot of attention to the needs of the individual. So perhaps you could elaborate a little bit on how that works in those projects.
Kelsey, how does your organization do that?
Sure. So as you were speaking, Sean, I was thinking about a resource through the Southern Poverty Law Center, formerly called Teaching Tolerance, and I think now it's called Learning for Justice. And they've developed a series of social justice standards, and sort of the anchor or like the foundation of their standards is exploring and unpacking identity. And I think in music, and particularly, you know, in the US, and we lean into a very, you know, Western European identity for music as the identity for all learners. And that's what you're exposed to at a young age. And I think in some ways that may invalidate the identity of the students that we're working with. And I think, you know, that can be a challenging way to start your music educational career. So our approach is really kind of blurring the lines between what we think of as a music class. And it can be very much a class about getting to know the individual students. And from there, the curriculum takes off. And one of the things that makes that particularly unique is that our teaching artists are incredibly diverse, as I said. So you will walk into, or now you will zoom into different classrooms, and you will see just a range of different music happening at all times. And I think that diversity of perspectives in a music classroom is critical in, you know, validating an individual child's diverse perspective.
Thank you, Kelsey. I think the time has now come to open up the discussion to questions from the wider group of participants. Lucas has been, I think, working hard to organize these. And so, Lucas, can I invite you to join us now and give us your choice of questions from the floor?
Yes. Well, we can start with Jeffrey Baker, who would like Emily and Kelsey to develop a bit more of on their work, and he's asking. Your approach seems to be based on a critique of an older way of working and thinking. And could you please say a little bit more about that critique that you have, that you seem to have? Also, do you feel that you are part of a larger movement for change in your sector? Or do you feel like outliers at the moment? So a question for Emily and Kelsey.
Okay,
Emily,
Emily.
I've spoken quite a bit.
Emily, would you like to start in on that one?
Sure, absolutely. And Frank, let us know if you'd like to expand on anything. Hi, Jeff. Thank you for your question. Wonderful to, you know, see your name. I know we can't see all of you. I would especially love to address the first part of that question or comment, because for me, the critique is really just how we value and view the process of students learning. And so a big part of what we want to focus on is how can we actually engage in the process of the learner as opposed to just the end product. And it also, I wanted to tie back in what Kelsey was just speaking about. We are very much in a system where we are trying to invoke change, but it is in a capacity that, you know, classical music is a very white, Western dominated activity. And so we are looking at how can we actually make something like this democratic. So we are, yes, we acknowledge that the students love playing in a full ensemble and they love the outcome and they love performances in huge halls with big audiences and 200 orchestra members. But I think what we are moving towards trying to value is the smaller interactions. And maybe that is smaller community making interactions, but for us, it's also giving the students a voice. And we talk a lot about social music making, and on Zoom over the last year, that's become increasingly difficult. So we've also engaged in social activities that maybe are less about music making and more about understanding their community of learners. So for example, one short example is this year we have created something called College Navigation, and it's a class for the students, and they bring up the questions that they have and they post their agenda and what they want to discuss so that we can really start bringing back around this idea of social music making to what the students actually want to do and creating a student voice. I know that's a lot for a short question.
Thanks, Emily. And Kelsey, what about the second part of that question? Do you feel that you're at the center of a movement, or do you feel that you're an outlier?
I do feel that we're at the center of a movement. And I do feel that, you know, as challenging perhaps as it is to think about change in this system of education and music education, it is certainly happening. And if it doesn't happen, which I think for a while it has stagnated in music education, that is where we start to see kind of those negative impacts affect, you know, what we might talk about as like student engagement or schools' valuing of these programs. But music has changed, and music education has not changed as much as it should, along with that broader change. So I do feel that things are changing. I think one of the advantages that we have as nonprofits is our agility. And I'm a former music educator in a school system, you know, and I think the challenges of working in sort of a bureaucratic school system I relate to them so much. So innovation can happen from the outside with these agile organizations. And I do think that we're going to start to see some of that trickle into the broader system as well.
If I could just add, I work at a university which tends to be resistant to change in music, and yet the entering music education students I work with are thinking much more along the lines of the kind of work that Kelsey and Emily are doing. And to me, it's just wonderful to see that. I think we're part of a larger movement that is going to emerge from the young people engaged in music teaching.
Thank you, Frank. Lucas, do you want to introduce another question?
Yes, I have a question from Dirk Proost, specifically to Sean. Dirk writes, it's wonderful that you from the start on work with refugee teachers, but do you make a selection which nationalities you combine? Dirk had the experience himself by working together with refugee teachers that they wanted to force on their own music from their homeland. How to solve this problem? Question to Sean.
Thank you, Dirk, for that wonderful question. Actually, before we start a music project in an accommodation, we go there, talk to the people who live there, try to find out where do the people come from that live there, what kind of musical experience do they have they already played music, are there maybe some professional musicians, and based on that we decide what kind of music we want to teach, because on one hand we want to teach music that the people like, and at the same time we also want to bring in our abilities and Actually, we never really had problems with the nationalities or the musical taste of our teachers, but maybe that's because we try to combine different people. For example, one teacher that I've been working with for the last few years studied opera singing and music pedagogy in Syria. So he's very familiar with classical music, with Arabic music. And when I teach with him, I have like more or less like pop, jazz, rock background. We cover a wide range of musical styles, and we try to bring in those styles. And yet there hasn't been really big trouble with where the teachers come from. But from the beginning, the teachers know we do music for the people who live there and not music for the teachers.
Thank you, Journe. Lucas.
Yes, speaking about style, Michael Neocleus has a question for Sean, Kim, Kelsey, and or Emily. His question is whether in the practice and the research on the practice that they work on, improvisation is part of this practice, and if so, how is it incorporated? Which place is it given?
Maybe start with Kim on that one.
Yeah, actually in this particular program, there's not a lot of improvisation, and I think it has to do with that it's very big groups of children, 50 children playing at the same time. So there has to be quite a lot of structure, or quite a lot of rules for everything to work. So in this particular practice, we don't work that much with improvisation, but it could be great to find ways to do that, to implement that, definitely.
What about Emily or Kelsey?
Emily, did you want to? I love this question, by the way. Emily, did you want to address it?
No, go ahead, Kelsey.
This is the standard, the music standard in the US and in California that we often refer to as the unloved standard. It's the most neglected music standard, I would say, in most classrooms, most music education classrooms. And our organization struggles with this as well. Just for a little context, we're meeting a deficit. So we're working with schools that lack access to music education, which means that we might be seeing students in elementary or middle school who've never received, really what would be considered kind of a baseline exposure to music education. So incorporating improvisation in that setting can be difficult because there's so much skill building that needs to happen. But another piece that I think is super critical in this conversation is the social emotional aspects of improvisation. I think creative bravery is something that I see some of our students really struggle with. And I don't necessarily have an answer for that, but I think that it's something that we work to explore in getting our students feeling confident in presenting ideas. And so much of that is just about creating safe learning spaces. So emphasis on safe learning spaces and kind of scaffolding in with getting the students to explore improvisation is definitely something we're working towards.
Anybody else want to address that? Sean, I guess your silence means there's not much improvisation with your group either?
Actually, there is improvisation,
okay.
But we're working in small groups, like I guess smaller groups, sometimes one-on-one sessions. So when I'm teaching, improvisation is always part of what I'm teaching. But I must admit, we usually don't include any improvisation in our public performances.
Okay, just so that we get a range of questions, I'm going to move on now and ask Lucas to provide another question for us.
Yes. Back to John's question during the panel discussion about power relationships. Fiona Evison would like Kim to expand on his thoughts regarding musicking not dissolving power relations, and which is in contrast to the view commonly exposed in community music academia.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Fiona is absolutely right that this is a very common idea, and I think the idea that musical harmony is somehow leading to social harmony is something I think both Jeff Baker and also Gillian Howell have written about this, that this is a very typical idea in musical social work, that there's sort of a conflation between musical harmony and social harmony, or that one thing leads to the other. But I think that at least what I try to work with in my research is the kind of exploring the kind of processes that connected to music making, in which music can definitely be seen as beneficial and a great resource for a lot of things, but at the same time, the very same processes also reproduce some existing power relationships or problematics that's not dissolved, but that is reproduced and actually even concealed in musical performances. So I think we need to work on some languages or some concepts that really let us explore those kind of issues. How music can both be good and bad at the same time. How it can transform and reproduce social worlds of the participants. So if you want to, I've written about this in my PhD thesis. So if you want to look into some ideas about this, please take a look at some of my research. But it's a very, very interesting question. Obviously, I think so.
Thanks, Kim. Back to Lucas again.
Yes, I have a question from Anthony Anderson for Alex Lamont, and his question is: do musical instruments demonstrate a reification of music, which is otherwise so difficult to get hold of?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. Yeah, I suppose so in a way, but they need to come alive, don't they? I mean, the reason that people had for donating was that their instruments were being unused. So a musical instrument isn't a reification of music if no one's using it to make music. I suppose it's a bit like a piece of sheet music. You know, it doesn't do anything until you engage with it. But I think the tangible nature is important, though, in people's motivations, is that something of themselves, a physical object, is going to support a scheme, and it's something that was personally owned. So this is why I was sort of concluding in my presentation that this is a different kind of donation to donating money. There's a lot of research about financial donation or time. Or blood, you know, even of yourself, you know, you make more and it doesn't matter, but you give your violin away, you don't, you know, you can't make another one. You can maybe buy another one, but it's the physical artifact, I think, is important. So yes, to see that as a reification of music itself, crossing boundaries. It's not something that anybody actually said, but it's a really interesting concept there. So yeah, thanks for that comment.
Thanks, Alex. I could just comment myself from having been a volunteer in the Music Fund project, where I've on occasions gone to actually receive the instrument from a donor, and sometimes that's been going to their house, or sometimes it's meant arranging to meet in a public place. But I've noticed that there is a need on the donor to make something of the moment, almost turn it into a ritual. It's not just that they hand it across to you in a bag, but they want to talk about it. They want to sit down and make this something quite symbolic, if you like, this act of giving. And it's somehow related to the tangible nature of the instrument itself and what it means to them. I think if they were just giving money, there wouldn't be such a pull to a kind of ritual, physical moment of handing it over.
That's a great point, John. It actually makes the research very easy because people want to tell the story often. And the photo I showed you is from one of the donation events for Music Fund, where this young man was very pleased to be. He was pleased to pose with his guitar, but he had too many guitars, so he was happy to let it go as well. But marking the moment, that's interesting. That sort of, yes, the physical nature of that is important too.
Thanks, Alex. Lucas, we've got time for some more questions.
I think, well, I have no more questions to propose to you, so so I think we can start to go on to listen to some music, no? And
it's always good to be ahead of time. So thank you, Lucas, and thank you particularly to all our presenters for a really fascinating and diverse set of perspectives on this theme.
Okay.
So Lucas, back to you.
Yes. And before closing this session, we can now listen and see a short 2-minute video of music proposed by Tozo, which is the Ostend Street Orchestra. And musician Bart Maris knows them well because he actively works with them. Bart, you're there, please.
I'm there, yes. You hear me?
Right. Yes, we hear you. And can you tell us shortly what we will be seeing?
Well, you will be seeing two things. First, you see me announcing a video. And at this moment, I'm doing a workshop in Ghent. In how do you say this? An orphanage for little kids. That's the only place where we can have kids together and make music. But you will be watching a project I did in Ostend, Ostend Street Orchestra, which is a project that tries to bring people together with completely different background, like normal people having daytime jobs and people having no occupation, people having no home, people having no future, everybody together just make music as the only future for the moment now, which is very important for me. So we get a background music? No. Yeah. Okay. So there will be the Tozo thing, a project we did for 3, 4, 5 years, but now has a kind of pause moment. Enjoy the video and keep up the good spirit.
Thank you, Bart. Yeah, so good. Thank you, Bart, for for proposing this video, and it's so good to be a few moments out there at the sea with the members of the Ostend Street Orchestra. Thank you, Kim Buskov, Frank Joser, Sean Priske, Alexandra Lamont, Kelsey Smith, and Emily Kubitsky for your precious contributions today. And next week, Tuesday, the 16th of February, we will have the second session on what we can call intercultural social music projects. It will be chaired by the new president of the SIMM platform, Bridie Lay Bartlett. Beware though about the timing, and the next two sessions, the next 2 weeks will be in the morning, starting at 10 a.m. Central European time, so that our friends and colleagues from Asia can be with us live without having to stay up late at night. If you listen to our SIMM podcast, you can find an episode online now introducing both sessions. After today, we will still have 4 more symposium sessions planned. We were in the middle of the symposium today. You can find all the details on the websites of SIMM and also the website of BOZAR. I really hope many of you will be with us these coming weeks. Bring your friends and colleagues. Bye.